The chorus hits mid-argument at a party in the Hollywood Hills. Someone cranks the radio louder. A crowd of beautiful people freezes as that unmistakable voice cuts through the chatter. You're so vain. You probably think this song is about you. In the sudden silence, one man's face hardens. He knows that bass line. He knows those lyrics. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a whisper echoes, David. This isn't just a song playing at a party. This is 1973, and America is obsessed with a mystery that has no answer. A riddle wrapped in an apricot scarf, a trap disguised as a hit single. The early 70s were different. Fame felt smaller, more intimate. When a song pointed fingers, everyone knew who might be in the crosshairs. And when Carly Simon released You're So Vain, she didn't just write a hit. She created a cultural phenomenon that would outlast every suspect, every theory, every attempt at solving it. The answer isn't the point. Vanity is. To understand how one woman could hold the entertainment world hostage for 50 years with a single question, you need to understand the world she came from. Carly Simon wasn't born into music. She was born into power. Her childhood home in Stamford, Connecticut, wasn't just wealthy. It was a salon. Her father, Richard Simon, co-founded Simon & Schuster, one of America's most prestigious publishing houses. Their dinner table hosted conversations with Jackie Robinson, who would hit baseballs with young Carly in the backyard. Albert Einstein reportedly came for dinner. This wasn't a family that observed celebrity culture from the outside. They were the inside. This background matters because You're So Vain could only have been written by someone who moved effortlessly through exclusive circles. Someone who wasn't intimidated by famous men because she'd grown up around them. Someone who could observe their behavior with the cool precision of an anthropologist. By 1972, the music world was shifting. The collective protests of the 60s had given way to something more introspective. The singer-songwriter movement was born from this cultural exhaustion. Artists like Carole King, Joni Mitchell, and James Taylor were turning inward, writing songs of personal confession rather than social manifestos. But even within this intimate movement, Carly Simon stood apart. Her early hits revealed a different kind of vulnerability. That's the Way I've Always Heard It Should Be wasn't a love song. It was a meditation on marriage as a trap, a sterile end to personal freedom. For women influenced by the feminist movement, this was revolutionary. Here was someone questioning the very institutions others celebrated. Anticipation, famously written in 15 minutes while waiting for Cat Stevens to pick her up for a date, captured something else entirely. The electric thrill of possibility, the moment before everything changes. These weren't just personal songs. They were cultural mirrors reflecting a generation caught between old expectations and new freedoms. Then came the marriage that made her half of music's golden couple. James Taylor represented the new male sensitivity, vulnerable, confessional, the antithesis of the swaggering rock gods who had dominated the previous decade. Together they embodied this cultural moment, introspective, beautiful, and impossibly well-connected. But success in the singer-songwriter world required a delicate balance. Too personal, and you became a therapy session. Too universal, and you lost the intimacy that made the movement powerful. Carly Simon was about to solve this problem in the most brilliant way possible, by turning the confessional mode outward as an accusation. The recording plans for her third album brought her to London's Trident Studios in 1972. She was working with Richard Perry, a producer who specialized in creating massive, polished hits. Perry had just finished Harry Nilsson's Nilsson Schmilsson, including the global smash Without You. He wasn't interested in quiet folk ballads. He was there to make a statement. Simon had been carrying around a song fragment for over a year. Just a chorus, really. A melody with words that felt like a complete thought. You're so vain, you probably think this song is about you. It was clever, self-contained, almost like a proverb, but it was also frustrating. Every time she tried to build verses around it, the song felt preachy, self-righteous. The stakes were enormous. This wasn't just another album. The singer-songwriter movement was reaching its commercial peak, and the competition was fierce. Carole King's Tapestry had spent 15 weeks at #1. Joni Mitchell was being hailed as a genius. James Taylor was selling millions. Simon needed something that would establish her not just as another talented voice, but as a defining artist of her generation. That chorus was her key. She just needed to find the right door to unlock. Richard Perry heard that chorus and knew immediately he was listening to a #1 hit, but he also knew it was trapped in the wrong song. Every time Simon played it as a slow, acoustic ballad, it felt like a lecture. The melody was too playful for such a heavy-handed approach. The words were too clever to be delivered with folk earnestness. "It needs to move," Perry told her. "It needs to groove." This was the breakthrough moment. The song wasn't meant to be a wounded confession or a bitter complaint. It was meant to be something far more dangerous, a trap disguised as entertainment. Perry pushed Simon to find a tempo that would let the chorus breathe, that would give it the swagger it deserved. The hook's architecture was already perfect. "You're so vain. You probably think this song is about you," worked on multiple levels simultaneously. It was an accusation that protected itself. It was a mirror that revealed the observer as much as the observed. Most brilliantly, it was a line that became more powerful every time someone wondered if it applied to them. But the verses were still missing. Simon had tried writing them as direct attacks, personal grievances, specific complaints about specific men. Nothing worked. The song felt small, petty, like gossip rather than art. Then Perry's pressure to find the right groove unlocked something unexpected. As Simon experimented with different tempos, different feels, she began to think about the chorus differently. What if it wasn't about one man? What if it was about a type of man, an archetype she'd encountered again and again throughout her life? Growing up in her father's world, moving through the circles of fame and power, she'd observed this figure repeatedly. The man who entered every room as if he owned it. The one who checked his reflection while talking to you. The celebrity who had confused being desired with being interesting. She dated them, befriended them, watched them perform their vanity as if it were a public service. This composite concept changed everything. Instead of writing verses about specific grievances, she could create a forensic profile. Instead of settling scores, she could document a phenomenon. The song became an anthropological study disguised as a pop single. The language choices became crucial. Simon had grown up around writers, publishers, people who understood the power of precise words. She wasn't going to rant or generalize. Every detail would be specific, verifiable, almost like evidence in a court case. The verses wouldn't just describe this archetypal figure, they would build a case against him. "You walked into the party like you were walking onto a yacht." The opening line established everything: class, entitlement, the performance of casual superiority. This wasn't just confidence, it was theater. Your hat strategically dipped below one eye. Your scarf, it was apricot. The word strategically was devastating. His look wasn't effortless, it was calculated. And apricot, not red, not blue, but apricot, suggested a man so concerned with his image that he'd chosen a color most people couldn't even name. You had one eye in the mirror as you watched yourself gavotte. A gavotte, an archaic French dance. The word choice was perfect, suggesting someone so pretentious he'd use his own life as performance art. The one eye in the mirror became the song's central image, a man whose primary relationship was with his own reflection. Perry watched this transformation with fascination. The slow, preachy ballad was becoming something entirely different, a mid-tempo groove that smiled while it cut, a song that invited you to dance along with your own destruction. The melody that had felt trapped in folk earnestness now had room to breathe, to swagger, to match the arrogance of its subject. But Simon wasn't finished building her case. If this was going to be a composite portrait, she needed details that would make it feel real, specific, undeniable. She needed clues that would turn listeners into detectives, that would make the song feel like a puzzle worth solving. The verses were about to become a treasure map, leading to a destination that might not even exist. The verses Simon was building weren't just descriptions, they were evidence. Each line functioned like a piece of forensic data, specific enough to feel real, detailed enough to spark recognition, but crafted with the precision of someone who understood exactly how powerful the right words could be. You walked into the party like you were walking onto a yacht. This opening shot established everything about class and entitlement in a single image. The comparison wasn't accidental. A yacht represented a very specific world: Mediterranean glamour, international jet-set privilege, the kind of casual luxury that required no explanation because it assumed everyone understood the reference. This wasn't just a man entering a room. This was someone making an entrance, someone who expected the room to reorganize itself around his presence. The line also revealed Simon's observational genius. She wasn't describing how this man saw himself. She was describing how he moved through the world, the unconscious arrogance that shaped even his walk. The word "like" was crucial. He wasn't actually walking onto a yacht, but he carried himself as if every space he entered was his personal vessel, every gathering his private party. Then came the fashion forensics. Your hat strategically dipped below one eye. Your scarf, it was apricot. The word strategically was devastating because it exposed the calculation behind what was meant to appear effortless. This wasn't a man who happened to look good. This was someone who constructed his image with the care of a set designer. Every angle was considered, every detail planned. But the real genius was in the specificity of apricot, not red, not orange, not even peach. Apricot. It was such a precise, almost fussy color choice that it painted a picture of someone deeply concerned with standing out, someone who would choose a shade most people couldn't even name. The scarf became a symbol of affected sophistication, the kind of detail that screamed, "Look at me," while pretending to whisper. The image conjured was unmistakably 70s, the era of peacock fashion, when successful men competed through increasingly elaborate displays of style. This was the decade when male celebrities wore scarves as statements, when fashion became a form of performance art. Simon was documenting a cultural moment through the lens of personal vanity. You had one eye in the mirror as you watched yourself gavotte. This line became the emotional center of the entire song, the image that crystallized everything she was trying to capture about this archetypal figure. The one eye in the mirror suggested someone so narcissistic that even while engaging with others, his primary focus remained on his own reflection. The choice of gavotte was inspired. A gavotte was an old French court dance, formal and pretentious, the kind of reference that required cultural education to fully appreciate. By using this word, Simon suggested someone so affected that he turned simple social interaction into elaborate performance art. He wasn't just dancing, he was gavottes, making even his movements seem historically significant. The image worked on multiple levels. Literally, it painted a picture of someone checking himself out while socializing, the kind of person who positioned himself near mirrors and reflective surfaces. Metaphorically, it captured the essence of narcissism, the inability to fully engage with others because you're always monitoring your own performance. This wasn't just vanity, it was vanity as a worldview. The man in the song had made himself the star of every interaction, the main character in every room. The mirror became his most important relationship, more compelling than any human connection. And all the girls dreamed that they'd be your partner. This line shifted the focus from personal behavior to public impact. This wasn't just a handsome man with an ego problem. This was a celebrity, someone whose desirability had become a matter of public record. The word "dreamed" suggested fantasy, aspiration, the kind of fame that made ordinary people project their desires onto a public figure. The line also revealed the trap of celebrity masculinity in the 70s. Success meant becoming the object of universal desire, but that desire often had nothing to do with who you actually were. These men became symbols, fantasies, projections of what others wanted them to be. The girls weren't dreaming of partnership with a real person. They were dreaming of partnership with an image, an idea, a carefully constructed performance. Simon was documenting how fame could corrupt not just the famous person, but the entire ecosystem around them. When someone becomes a prize to be won rather than a person to be known, everyone loses, including the person at the center of the fantasy. These weren't just clever lyrics. They were cultural criticism disguised as pop music, anthropological observation wrapped in a 3-minute song. Simon had found a way to make the personal universal, to turn specific grievances into timeless truths about power, fame, and the seductive danger of believing your own mythology. The clues were in place. Now she needed to make them impossible to ignore. Then came the clue that changed everything, the line that transformed idle speculation into active investigation. You flew your Learjet up to Nova Scotia to see the total eclipse of the sun. This wasn't just another detail. This was a timestamp, a verifiable fact that listeners could check, a breadcrumb that led to actual dates and real events. There had been a total solar eclipse visible from Nova Scotia on March 7th, 1970. Suddenly, Simon's composite portrait had a concrete anchor point, a moment in history that narrowed the field of suspects dramatically. The brilliance of this line worked on multiple levels. First, it established wealth on an almost incomprehensible scale. In 1970, owning or chartering a Learjet wasn't just expensive, it was a statement of belonging to an extremely exclusive club. This wasn't someone who flew first class. This was someone who treated private aviation as casually as most people treated taxi rides. But the real genius was in the motivation. Flying to Nova Scotia to watch a 2-minute celestial event revealed something far more damning than mere wealth. It revealed a personality that treated the entire world as his personal entertainment venue. This was someone so removed from ordinary concerns, so insulated from normal limitations, that he could pursue whims across international borders without a second thought. The eclipse detail also captured something essential about early 70s celebrity culture. This was the era when famous people began treating their lives as performance art, when personal experiences became public spectacles. Flying to see an eclipse wasn't just about witnessing a rare astronomical event. It was about being the kind of person who could do such things, about adding another exotic chapter to a carefully curated public image. For listeners in 1972, this line hit differently than it would today. Commercial aviation was still relatively exclusive. International travel required more planning and expense, and the idea of chartering a private jet for personal pleasure seemed almost fantastically extravagant. Simon was describing a level of privilege that most people could barely imagine. The line also revealed the subject's relationship with nature itself. He didn't just watch the eclipse. He consumed it, traveled to it, made it about him. Even celestial events became opportunities for self-aggrandizement, moments to demonstrate his ability to be wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted. Then came the follow-up punch. You went to Saratoga and your horse, naturally, won. If the eclipse line established privilege, this line revealed its inevitable companion, supernatural luck, the kind of charmed existence where everything falls into place without effort. Saratoga represented old American money, the kind of institutional wealth that had been accumulating for generations. The Saratoga racecourse wasn't just about gambling, it was about belonging to a world where leisure had been elevated to high art, where the right connections mattered more than the right bets. This was August in upstate New York, where the social season meant as much as the racing season. The word naturally was devastating in its casualness. Of course his horse won. Of course everything worked out in his favor. This wasn't someone who struggled or failed or even had to try very hard. Success followed him like a faithful pet, reinforcing his belief that the universe had been designed for his personal benefit. But Simon understood something deeper about this kind of luck. It wasn't really about horses or eclipses or even money. It was about a worldview that expected favorable outcomes, that took good fortune for granted, that never questioned whether such advantages might be unearned or unfair. This was privilege so complete it had become invisible to itself. These details worked because they felt both specific and archetypal. Listeners could imagine checking the eclipse dates, looking up Saratoga results, verifying the clues, but they could also recognize the type. The person whose life seemed to unfold according to different rules, whose casual extravagances revealed a fundamental disconnect from how most people experienced the world. Simon had created something unprecedented in pop music, a song that functioned like investigative journalism, that invited listeners to become detectives, while simultaneously revealing universal truths about power, privilege, and the corrupting effects of getting everything you want. The clues were gathering momentum, building towards something that felt like revelation. But the most dangerous element was still to come, the moment when the song itself became part of the mystery. The magic happened at Trident Studios in London, a place where the Beatles had recorded parts of the White Album, where David Bowie was crafting his Ziggy Stardust persona. The building itself seemed to hum with creative electricity, and in early 1972, Carly Simon was about to add her own voltage to that current. Richard Perry had assembled the perfect team. Klaus Voormann, the German bassist who had designed the Beatles' Revolver album cover and played with John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band, would lay down the foundation. His bass line became the song's secret weapon, a loping, almost lazy groove that suggested confidence without aggression, swagger without effort. It was the musical equivalent of that yacht-walking entrance, casual but calculated. Jim Gordon, fresh from sessions with Derek and the Dominoes, brought his crisp, precise drumming. The rhythm section they created together was deceptively simple, the kind of groove that sounded effortless but required absolute precision. Too fast, and the song would lose its cool superiority. Too slow, and it would become ponderous, preachy. They found the exact tempo where judgment could masquerade as entertainment. Simon herself played the acoustic guitar, her strumming pattern dry and rhythmic, cutting through the mix like a sharp observation in a crowded conversation. This wasn't the gentle finger-picking of typical folk music. This was percussive, almost aggressive, each chord struck with the precision of someone making a point. The arrangement was deliberately spare. No orchestration, no elaborate production flourishes that might distract from the lyrics. Every element served the song's central purpose, creating a musical frame worthy of Simon's forensic portrait. The groove had to be irresistible enough that people would sing along before they fully processed what they were singing about. Perry pushed Simon to find the right vocal approach. This couldn't sound like an angry ex-girlfriend settling scores. It had to feel observational, almost anthropological. Simon's delivery became coolly conversational, as if she were describing someone to a friend over coffee rather than prosecuting them in public. The deadpan precision made every accusation more devastating. But the session's most legendary moment was still to come. Harry Nilsson, who was also working at Trident, dropped by to hear what they were recording. When the playback reached that killer chorus, he reportedly shouted, "That's the best song I've ever heard." The enthusiasm was infectious, but it also validated what everyone in the room already knew. They were capturing something special. Then Mick Jagger arrived. The Rolling Stones were in London, and Jagger was a friend, possibly more than a friend, depending on which rumors you believed. He'd come by supposedly just to visit, but when he heard the track, something clicked. The song needed backing vocals, and Jagger's voice had exactly the right sneer, the perfect combination of charm and menace. What happened next became part of rock and roll folklore. The microphones were still live when Jagger started singing along. His voice wrapped around Simon's melody like a co-conspirator, adding layers of irony that no one could have planned. When Simon sang, "You're So Vain," Jagger's harmony came in with "You're so vain," stretching the word into something almost mocking, almost seductive. The performance was electric, but the implications were staggering. Here was one of the prime suspects, one of the men who could easily have inspired the song, now singing the accusation himself. Was this confession, deflection, a private joke between former lovers? The ambiguity was perfect, adding another layer of mystery to a song already built on questions. Jagger's contribution wasn't just musical, it was theatrical. His voice carried all the swagger and self-awareness that the song was critiquing, making him simultaneously the perfect interpreter and the perfect target. The irony was so thick you could cut it with an apricot scarf. The session wrapped with everyone knowing they'd captured something unprecedented. This wasn't just a song, it was a cultural event waiting to happen. The groove was irresistible, the mystery was compelling, and now they had rock royalty singing along with his own potential indictment. When No Secrets was released in November 1972, "You're So Vain" was positioned as the lead single. The song didn't climb the charts. It exploded onto them, reaching #1 and staying there for 3 weeks in January 1973. But the real explosion was cultural, as America became obsessed with a single question that would define the next 50 years. The morning after You're So Vain hit #1, entertainment journalists across America woke up to the same realization. They had the story of the decade and absolutely no way to prove it. The song had created something unprecedented in pop culture, a mystery with a soundtrack, a guessing game that played itself every time someone turned on the radio. The public didn't need encouragement to start speculating. Within weeks of the single's release, the Suspects Gallery had assembled itself, a rogues gallery of 70s male celebrities who fit the profile too perfectly to ignore. Each name that surfaced brought its own evidence, its own compelling case for guilt. Warren Beatty emerged as the prime suspect almost immediately, and for good reason. He was the archetype that the song seemed designed to describe, Hollywood's most famous womanizer, a man whose romantic conquests read like a who's who of American beauty. He'd dated everyone from Natalie Wood to Julie Christie to Diane Keaton. And yes, Carly Simon had been part of that legendary list. Beatty's public persona matched the song's forensic profile with unsettling precision. You walked into the party like you were walking onto a yacht. This could have been written specifically about the man who had turned casual confidence into a career. His entrance into any room was an event, his presence a form of entertainment that everyone else was expected to appreciate. The apricot scarf detail seemed almost too specific to be coincidental. Beatty was known for his meticulous attention to fashion, his ability to make even casual clothes look like costume choices. He understood that image was performance, that every detail contributed to the larger mythology he was building around himself. Most damning was the line about, "All the girls dreamed that they'd be your partner." This wasn't just about personal attractiveness. This was about cultural status. Beatty had become the prize that defined success for an entire generation of women. Dating Warren Beatty meant something in 1972, carried social weight that went far beyond personal chemistry. When pressed about the song in interviews, Beatty's response was perfect in its arrogance. He didn't deny it, he embraced it, reportedly calling Simon to thank her for the song. This reaction was so perfectly vain that it seemed to confirm every accusation the lyrics made. Only someone who truly believed the world revolved around him would hear a song about narcissism and feel complimented. But Beatty wasn't the only suspect. Mick Jagger's involvement in the recording sessions made him an equally compelling candidate, albeit for different reasons. His presence on the track created layers of irony that no screenwriter could have invented. Here was a man singing backing vocals on his own potential indictment, adding his voice to accusations that could easily have been about him. Jagger embodied a different kind of vanity, not Hollywood sophistication, but rock and roll swagger. His stage presence was built on preening, on making audiences watch him watch himself. The one eye in the mirror line could have been describing any Rolling Stones performance, where Jagger's relationship with his own reflection was part of the show. The eclipse clue seemed to fit Jagger's lifestyle of casual extravagance. This was someone who treated the world as his personal playground, who could easily have chartered a jet to chase celestial events across international borders. The Saratoga reference worked too. The Stones had played venues across America, and Jagger moved through high society with the same ease he brought to working-class clubs. James Taylor presented the most psychologically complex possibility. As Simon's husband, he would have had access to her most intimate observations, her private frustrations with male ego. The theory that "you're so vain" was a warning rather than a post-mortem added domestic drama to the mystery, suggesting that even the most sensitive of the new male archetypes wasn't immune to the corruption of fame. Taylor's pilot's license made the Learjet reference plausible, while his performances at venues like Saratoga created circumstantial evidence. But the real intrigue lay in the timing. The song was recorded and released during their courtship and early marriage. Was this a love song in reverse? A woman documenting the man she was falling for while simultaneously warning him about who he might become. The beauty of Simon's creation was that the song could be mapped onto almost any prominent male figure of the era, The clues were specific enough to feel real, but universal enough to fit multiple suspects. Each new name that surfaced in the press brought its own supporting evidence, its own compelling case for guilt. This wasn't just gossip, it was anthropology. Simon had created a mirror that revealed as much about the observers as the observed. Anyone who recognized themselves in the song's portrait became part of the mystery, trapped in a puzzle that had no solution because it was designed to be unsolvable. What happened next was unprecedented in popular music. Simon had accidentally created the perfect perpetual motion machine, a mystery that generated more mystery every time someone tried to solve it. The song's success spawned an entirely new form of celebrity maintenance, turning a single question into a 50-year career strategy. Every interview became a ritual. Journalists couldn't help themselves. No matter what Simon was ostensibly there to discuss, a new album, a tour, a memoir, the conversation would inevitably circle back to the same question. Who was it about? And Simon, with the skill of a master chess player, learned to give just enough to keep the game alive, without ever delivering checkmate. Her answers became an art form in themselves. She would smile mysteriously, drop hints that could mean everything or nothing, offer clues that only deepened the puzzle. "Well, I can tell you it's not about one person," she might say, which only made people wonder about the composite theory. Or she'd mention that one verse might be about someone different from the others, fracturing the mystery into multiple smaller mysteries. The press ate it up. Entertainment journalists discovered they had stumbled onto the perfect evergreen story, one that could be revisited annually, updated with new theories, refreshed with each cultural moment. The song became a reliable source of content, a mystery that aged like fine wine rather than spoiling like yesterday's news. In 2003, Simon took the marketing genius to its logical extreme. She announced that she would auction off the secret for charity. Dick Ebersol, then president of NBC Sports, paid $50,000 to have lunch with Simon and learn the truth. But even this revelation came with conditions. Ebersol was sworn to secrecy, allowed only to confirm that he knew the answer without ever revealing it. The auction was brilliant theater. It satisfied the public's desire for resolution while actually preserving the mystery. Ebersol became part of the conspiracy, a keeper of secrets who could tantalize without revealing. His occasional hints in interviews, "Let's just say it's someone very famous," only added fuel to the speculation fire. Then came the whisper heard round the world. In 2010, Simon released a new acoustic version of the song for a documentary soundtrack. The media hype claimed she had embedded a secret clue in the recording. Fans went into full detective mode, playing the track backwards, isolating individual instruments, analyzing every breath and pause. They found what sounded like a backwards whisper. When reversed and enhanced, the voice seemed to murmur, "David." The internet exploded. Was it David Geffen, the powerful music executive? David Bowie, the ultimate performer of identity? David Crosby, with his folk connections and legendary ego? The single syllable spawned 1,000 theories. Simon's response to the David revelation was characteristically perfect. She neither confirmed nor denied the whisper's meaning, instead letting the speculation build naturally. The beauty of David as a clue was its magnificent ambiguity, common enough to apply to dozens of celebrities, specific enough to feel like a genuine revelation. The song had transcended its original medium to become something closer to interactive entertainment. Each new generation discovered the mystery fresh, bringing their own cultural references and conspiracy theories to the puzzle. Social media gave the speculation new platforms, new ways to dissect every lyric and interview for hidden meanings. Film placements kept the song culturally relevant across decades. The most perfect use came in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, where Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey sing it at each other in a public confrontation. The scene captured the song's essential trap, two people using it to accuse each other of vanity, each proving the other's point simply by participating in the accusation. This longevity wasn't accidental. Simon had understood something fundamental about human nature. We're all fascinated by mysteries that might be about us. The song worked as a mirror, and mirrors never go out of style. Every person who wondered if they recognized themselves in those lyrics became complicit in the mystery's survival. The avalanche had become self-sustaining, rolling forward through pure cultural momentum, gathering new suspects and theories with each revolution. After 43 years of masterful deflection, Carly Simon finally blinked. Sort of. In 2015, while promoting her memoir, Boys in the Trees, she sat down for an interview that would reshape the entire mystery. The question came, as it always did, inevitable as sunrise. Who was "You're So Vain" about? But this time, instead of her usual enigmatic smile and artful dodge, Simon offered something unprecedented, a partial answer. "The second verse," she said, almost casually. "The one about the Learjet and the eclipse. That's about Warren Beatty." The entertainment world stopped. After decades of speculation, theories, and elaborate detective work, she had confirmed what many had suspected all along. Warren Beatty, Hollywood's legendary womanizer, was indeed the man who flew his Learjet to Nova Scotia to see the total eclipse of the sun. But Simon's confession was as carefully crafted as the original song. She hadn't solved the mystery. She had exploded it into fragments. By confirming only one verse, she had implicitly revealed what many had suspected but never quite articulated. The song was indeed a composite, a carefully constructed mosaic of different men, different experiences, different observations about male vanity. "Warren thinks the whole thing is about him," she added with a knowing smile. "But it's not." The revelation was simultaneously satisfying and maddening. Finally, concrete proof that the clues were real, that the forensic details weren't just clever fiction. The eclipse verse had always been the most specific, the most verifiable, and now it had a name attached. Warren Beatty had actually chartered that jet, actually chased that celestial event across international borders, actually lived the kind of casually extravagant life that the song documented. But the partial confession raised more questions than it answered. If the second verse was about Beatty, who were the first and third verses about? The opening lines about walking into parties like boarding yachts, the apricot scarf, the strategic hat positioning, whose biography was Simon documenting there? And the final verse, with its references to Saratoga and winning horses, whose charmed existence was she cataloging? The public reaction was fascinating in its complexity. Some felt vindicated. They had been right about Beatty all along. Others felt cheated, realizing that their decades of speculation had been based on an incomplete premise. The song wasn't a single portrait, but a gallery. Not one man's story, but an entire cultural phenomenon distilled into 3 verses and a devastating chorus. Music journalists scrambled to reframe their analyses. If "You're So Vain" was a composite, then every theory could be partially correct. Mick Jagger could have inspired one verse, James Taylor another, with various other suspects filling in the remaining details. The mystery hadn't been solved, it had been democratized. Simon's strategic revelation also demonstrated her continued mastery of the mystery's mechanics. By giving away one piece of the puzzle, she had made the remaining pieces more valuable, more intriguing. The partial confession felt like a gift to longtime fans, while simultaneously recruiting new generations of amateur detectives. The timing wasn't coincidental. Simon was promoting a memoir, and the revelation generated exactly the kind of media attention that publishers dream about. But it also served a deeper purpose. It validated the song's enduring cultural relevance while preserving its essential mystery. She had found a way to feed the beast without killing it. The composite theory also elevated the song's artistic status. Instead of a petty kiss and tell disguised as pop music, "You're So Vain" revealed itself as something more sophisticated, a sociological study, an anthropological investigation into the nature of male celebrity in the early 70s. Simon hadn't just been settling scores, she had been documenting a cultural phenomenon. This reframing transformed the listening experience. Each verse became a separate case study, each detail a clue to a different mystery. The song's architecture suddenly made more sense, why the clues felt both specific and universal, why so many different suspects could fit the profile so perfectly. The mystery had evolved, becoming more complex rather than simpler. more intriguing rather than resolved. Simon had given her audience exactly what they wanted, while ensuring they would never stop wanting more. To understand why You're So Vain became more than just a hit song, why it became a cultural phenomenon that has endured for 50 years, you need to understand the precise historical moment it captured. The early 70s weren't just another decade. They represented a fundamental shift in how Americans thought about themselves, their relationships, and their place in the world. The 60s had ended badly. The utopian dreams of peace, love, and collective action had crashed against the realities of Vietnam, Watergate, and economic uncertainty. The communal spirit that had defined the previous decade was giving way to something more inward-looking, more personally focused. Author Tom Wolfe would famously label this period the Me Decade, and his diagnosis was more than just clever wordplay. It identified a genuine cultural transformation. Where the 60s had been about changing the world, the 70s became about changing yourself. The focus shifted from external revolution to internal exploration. Therapy became mainstream. Self-help books topped bestseller lists. Personal fulfillment replaced social justice as the primary cultural goal. It wasn't that people stopped caring about larger issues, but they began to believe that fixing yourself was the necessary first step to fixing anything else. This psychological shift created perfect conditions for You're So Vain to flourish. The song arrived at exactly the moment when Americans were becoming fascinated with personality, with the inner workings of individual psychology, with the question of what made people tick. Simon had written a forensic psychological profile disguised as a pop song, and her audience was primed to appreciate that kind of analysis. The celebrity culture of the early 70s was expanding rapidly, but it still felt intimate, manageable. There were no 24-hour entertainment news cycles, no social media to fragment attention across countless micro-celebrities. Fame was concentrated among a smaller group of figures who felt genuinely larger than life. When a song pointed fingers at someone famous, everyone knew who the possible targets were. This concentrated celebrity ecosystem made You're So Vain feel like insider information. Listeners weren't just hearing a song. They were being invited into an exclusive world where they could decode references, identify suspects, participate in the kind of gossip that had previously been reserved for industry insiders. The song democratized celebrity culture, making everyone feel like they had backstage access to the drama. The women's liberation movement was reshaping gender dynamics in ways that made Simon's approach revolutionary. For decades, popular music had been dominated by women singing about their feelings, usually about men who had hurt them, left them, or failed to love them properly. These songs positioned women as victims, as passive recipients of male behavior, as people who could only react to what men chose to do. You're So Vain flipped this dynamic completely. Here was a woman who wasn't pleading or crying or begging for attention. She was observing, analyzing, and delivering judgment. She wasn't asking for anything from the man in the song. She was simply documenting his behavior with the cool precision of a scientist studying an interesting specimen. This wasn't emotional. It was anthropological. The song's narrator held all the power. She saw through the performance, understood the psychology, and refused to be impressed by the very qualities that made other people swoon. She wasn't trying to win this man back or change his behavior. She was simply noting it for the record, like a researcher documenting the mating rituals of an exotic species. This perspective resonated with a generation of women who were learning to see themselves differently, to value their own observations, to trust their own judgments about male behavior. The song became an anthem of female clarity, a demonstration that you could understand someone completely without being destroyed by that understanding. The chorus itself became a kind of social tool, a shorthand way of identifying and calling out narcissistic behavior in everyday life. People began using the phrase, "You're so vain," in conversations, at parties, in offices. The song had given them language for something they had always observed, but never quite knew how to articulate. The real measure of You're So Vain wasn't its chart performance or critical acclaim. It was how deeply it embedded itself into the daily language of American life. The song became a social utility, a tool people used to navigate their own relationships and observations about human behavior. At high school reunions across the country, someone would inevitably cue up the song when that one classmate made his grand entrance. The guy who still thought he was the star quarterback still expected the room to reorganize itself around his presence. The chorus became a collective eye roll, a shared understanding that needed no explanation. Radio DJs discovered they had a perfect weapon for call-in shows. When listeners phoned in to complain about ex-boyfriends or difficult co-workers, the song provided instant commentary. "Sounds like you're dealing with a real, you're so vain situation," became shorthand for a specific type of male behavior that everyone recognized, but few had been able to name so precisely. The song worked as a mirror in the most literal sense. It revealed as much about the listener as the subject. Anyone who heard those lyrics and felt a flash of recognition, a moment of, "Wait, is this about me?" became part of the mystery's ongoing psychology experiment. The very act of wondering if you were vain enough to think the song was about you proved that you probably were. That chorus that indicts and protects made the mystery immortal, a perfect trap that catches every ego that steps too close to examine itself. The song's genius wasn't in solving the puzzle of male vanity. It was in making that puzzle impossible to ignore. If this era's soundtrack tells you something about your own story, subscribe for more cultural history through music. Tell me in the comments which lyric from the 70s still mirrors your life today.